Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for attending the Handbook of Learning Analytics second edition launch party. I think I'm not going to dance or anything for the party part. I've got a mug of Marin's stepping up. So yeah, feel free to jam out at any point. I've got coffee. I don't know if anyone has anything else stronger, but it's a little bit early for me. I think it's way too early for Dragan, but I don't know. He's pretty tough. But thanks for joining us. I think what I'll do first is just do super quick introductions for each of the editors, and I'll probably call out the names in the list that are on my screen because I don't know that it's common. So Alyssa, do you want to go first? Introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Alyssa Wise. You've probably seen more than enough of me this conference already. I'm a professor of learning sciences and educational technology at New York University, and I direct the New York University Learning Analytics Research Network, NYU Learn. And yeah, I was one of the editors of this version of the handbook as well as the first edition.
Perfect. And then Dragan?
Hello, my name is Dragan Gasevic. I'm professor of learning analytics and also director of the Center for Learning Analytics at Monash University. Also involved in both editions of the handbook.
And Agathe?
My name is Agathe Merceron, if you say the French way, but Agatha is also fine. And I am a professor of computer science at Berlin University of Applied Sciences in Berlin, Germany. And it's where I am now, so it's 9 p.m. for me. I was not involved in the first edition of the handbook, but it was an honor and a pleasure to be involved in the second edition of the handbook. That's for me.
Great.
And Charles, don't forget to introduce yourself.
And me, I'm Charles Lang. I'm executive director of a thing called the Digital Futures Institute at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York City. And yes, I was also editing this handbook and the previous one. So I think we'll get started. On every slide, you've got the QR code and the web address for the new edition of the handbook. And so we'll start with a round of applause for everyone. And Alyssa is going to also give us some information, some administrative information.
I was just going to say it's worth mentioning that there was a fifth editor, even though he's not here.
Oh,
Maybe
yes,
we shouldn't
sure.
forget George Siemens. I don't know.
We forgot, yes.
I thought if we could just do a little shout out to say that obviously you guys probably know George, and I think the first edition of the handbook was somewhat of his brainchild, but it took a lot of work, particularly by Charles, to bring it to fruition. But certainly George has been instrumental in making this a vision, and it's important to acknowledge his contribution, even though he wasn't. I don't think he's here, right? He's not here at the moment. Yeah.
I think so.
Wasn't able to join us.
Yes, definitely. Sorry, that was an omission. Definitely. Yes, there are 5 editors who all heroically pushed this handbook over the line. Was there any admin things that we need to cover, Alyssa? Did you want to talk about the question answer?
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, and also some admin things. So we're going to have a great conversation here, but we do want to still ask you to put the Q&A in the HOVA. That makes an archive where lots of people can see it. It also helps us see all the different questions and organize them to ask them in some sort of logical order. And even though Charles has done an amazing job of putting it on, I think, every single screen, I'm also going to drop in a link to the handbook itself, in case you hadn't had a chance to look. I think that's it.
Perfect. Great. So we'll start off with a bit of background information on the handbook. As every good launch party has, we have an agenda. That nothing says party fun time like agenda. So we'll start off with a bit of the rationale and motivation, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's new and some of the challenges before we head into a Q&A, where if there are any of the authors present and they would like to talk specifically about their chapter, that would be great to hear from them. So starting off with the rationale for the handbook. And at any point, if the other editors want to chime in on any of these, please feel free. But I'll just briefly go over the handbook is a little bit different to other types of content that the community puts out, such as the journal and the conference. It is really probably the the second maybe point of contact for someone entering the field, like after maybe seeing content from the website or from a tweet or social media or something like that. The handbook is really meant to be the kind of next rung on the ladder to allow you to gain entry into the community and into the content and the world that is learning analytics. So what it is designed to be an entry point for people who are unfamiliar with learning analytics. One of the key places that it can do that job is through teaching. So what we want is for people who are teaching courses at Lassie or in their institutions to have a resource available to them to help them with their instruction. So something that is aimed at people who maybe have not done learning analytics before and are kind of taking a course for the first time. The other pieces that go with these two first pieces means that we are attempting to kind of summarize the state of the field but we can never really do that forever. We kind of do it for a time slice. So we're doing it for what things were like over the last couple of years. And in doing that, we kind of run into this quite complicated problem that I think we'll talk about a little bit later, which is that we are trying to define what are the foundational concepts or ideas that are milling around at this point in time in learning analytics. Does any of the other editors want to expand on any of that, or that seems like a fair summary?
Sounds good to me, Charles.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, it's also a way to contribute to the community and to do this mission of developing open educational resources in the LAC community.
Exactly. Yeah, I really can't stress enough how every author here has really done something for the learning analytics community, and a lot of them are motivated by that. They really want to give back. There's not a huge number of tenure committees or promotion committees that are looking for introductory texts being added to like counting for much. So it really is people who are invested in passing on the information, developing the community, bringing new people into the community that have contributed and made this happen. And I think that it's really important for us to acknowledge that and say thank you to all the people that contributed. So I think it's really important. So we want to look at the previous edition. Up on the screen now, we've got some basic stats around it. It came out 5 years ago. There are 30 chapters, 61 authors from 10 countries. And it was recently, and possibly Marion can speak more to this, it translated into Chinese. And the sections in it were foundational concepts, techniques and approaches, applications, and institutional strategies and systems. The kind of site visits that we get about 7,000 hits a year on it. For some reason, there's a spike in June. The best explanation, the best explanation I can think of is that there's like an overlap, like that's where the overlap is between the northern and southern hemispheres for No?
It's Lassie. I think it's Lassie.
Yes, it's what I thought too.
I think Lassie.
Mm.
I don't know. Okay. That was my guess.
So, that I think that makes a lot more sense. That it's like a Lassie-driven explosion once a year, and then we get a little bit of a bump in September, I guess, when people go back to, in the northern hemisphere, back to school.
No, Charles. I think that's in preparation for the deadline for LAC, which is usually October 1st. I think you have these really beautiful ideas, and I think...
I know. I'm just like... It's not usual that I'm the less cynical person.
I know. I'm very confused I'm the cynic in this conversation, but I'm pretty sure that's Lassie and submissions to the conference.
Fair enough.
But actually, as silly as that is, I actually think that's a really nice thing to see, that this resource we all put a lot of work into. One is being used at Lassie, which is an incredibly important event for students and new people in the field. And the fact that people are referring to the handbook when preparing their submissions to the conference, that's good. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. No, I'm totally fine with that. That sounds good. Does anyone else want to say anything about the previous edition that they think is important before I move to the new one? Okay, so, sorry.
No, I'm saying let's move to the new one.
Okay, let's move to the new one. So quick comparison. So came out this year. We've got fewer chapters. We've got 48 unique authors from 11 countries. And this time, to keep things more in line with this kind of introductory nature, we wanted to keep the word count around 4,000 for each of the chapters. And then we've moved to 3 sections: methods and techniques, applications, and use and systems. The logic for that we'll expand a little bit more later. Something that's important to note here, I think, is that it looks like we have gone up in terms of geographic diversity. There's a small caveat to that, and that a lot of that is located in very few chapters. We had, and the other editors can chime into this, we had certain goals that we wanted for this handbook in terms of participation. One of those was to increase gender representation, which we did in terms of first author. Another was geographic representation, to get more geographic diversity into this handbook. What has ended up happening is that we kind of ended up fighting, for pandemic and other reasons, some author attrition, and those authors were often replaced by people from the network of the editors. So that means that, that's predominantly North America, Canada, the US, Europe, and Australia. So we have probably lost a little bit of geographic diversity, but that is something that we think we can remedy, possibly by thinking harder about how to support authors from around the world, not just inviting them into the process. It probably isn't enough just to invite people and get a confirmation. We then have to follow up with actual support in having those chapters written, if that makes sense. So does anyone want to add anything else to that?
No, it's just basically important to emphasize that we had much more ambitions, like in terms of the different chapters, and some of the chapters, and we'll discuss later as well, that are not necessarily represented this time in specific type of topics. We had ambitions to get them. Initially, I think we sourced about 50 ideas for different chapters. And then over time, we realized, well, that'll be too many ideas. So we kind of narrowed them down to about 35, 36 ideas. We basically approached different types of authors. Some of them initially said yes, but then dropped out due to COVID and everything else that was happening in the last couple of years. And then we eventually ended up with 23 chapters. I think that's really important to emphasize, because we often kind of see the final product, but really creating a new handbook is a process. And just basically to reiterate, we launched the first edition of the handbook in Vancouver 2017 when Phil and Alyssa were organizing it. And immediately after that, or during that conference, we had our first editorial meeting, and we were kind of pumped up. Let's try to push it for 2020 or 2019. And then basically life took over the best of us. And then basically only in 2019 in Arizona, we really kind of dedicated all our resources and effort to start working on it. And clearly the pandemic was one of the key driving forces as well to kind of address some of these major issues. So that's why when I basically always kind of highlight the process in addition to the final product that you can see here today.
Yes, that's a super important thing to remember, and I think there's important lessons in there for learning analytics generally in terms of increasing participation. That really those life things are important to take into account when you're trying to increase accessibility and participation.
And the other thing perhaps, Charles, would be important to highlight as well is the first edition of the handbook was announced to start in 2013 and basically took about 4 years to deliver it due to various reasons. And then the second edition, we really, as I said, seriously started working on it in 2019. So it's just basically a much different type of publication in terms of the process than it is to compile a conference. Usually for a conference, the cycle is about 6-7 months to basically from the initial submissions of the pieces of work to the final product. For the journal, it has its own kind of continuous cycle of the submissions, and for a handbook takes good 2 to 3 years to basically from the initial conception of who you want to have in the particular handbook to the final product to have, because basically there are many moving pieces. The other interesting thing is that many people, when it comes on to the handbook and submission of their chapters, have far more relaxed conception of time and the deadlines than it is when you basically are submitting for a special issue. Typically for a special issue, people dare to ask up to a month of an extension. And then for the conference, we don't have ever extension. So basically just factoring the flexible conception of time that was also one of the driving factors of the timeline as well for the handbook.
Let me just add one thing, because those are great points, Dragan. I sort of wanted, when you were saying people took a long time, to point at everybody and be like, we're not talking about you, are we? But we, with that notion of being pumped after the first edition, I think there was also this idea of the handbook being a current reference. And we've seen now with 2 cycles that despite all of our best efforts for a bunch of reasons, structural and other, this is a 3 or 4 year thing. And so, one thing we might talk about as a community is there another way, another form of doing something than trying to put out, 23 to 30 chapters at a time that might help us, keep things current, but also how do we do that in a way that acknowledges people's labor? Because, as we know, handbook may already fall lower on the scale of things people get credit for. If we do something that seems different, that we don't lose that also.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yes, it is. It's a process. It certainly is a process, and so yeah, we are also very grateful for everyone who kind of stuck with us through the last couple of years. And COVID was not a small thing, but with respect to kind of content and keeping things current, some chapters do address COVID and some don't, and so it is there is a certain amount of lag that we do have to deal with. Okay, so with respect to new content, we have a bunch of new kind of topics that have changed from the 2017 edition to the 2022 edition. The addition of temporality, of fairness, bias, and equity, of collaboration, games, data literacy, human-centered approaches, and K-12 work. I don't know if, Dragan, you had some thoughts on how these things evolve. Did you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, we had basically some discussions as well as in different types of analysis, what we basically included into the handbook, which pieces of content are basically present in the first edition and the second edition. There are really some good news in terms of the introduction of some of the content. For example, temporality is really essential topic for learning analytics because we are acknowledging the dynamic nature of learning, whether we are talking about individual learning or learning in groups. There is lots of actually emphasis in the last few years as well in the field. We can see that in the LAC proceedings as well, how people are increasing that, how they are doing a good job and how they are really improving there. But obviously it's a kind of a very open field as well. And I think we are just making baby steps at this stage with respect to temporality. I think we really are still much more required to focus on different methodological steps, especially kind of integration of different methods. What kind of data can we use? What kind of data analytic methods we can use for analysis of different types of data? And to me, it really includes topic to my heart is also integration of multiple data channels as well. So we can get actually better representation and under what conditions certain data channels can be integrated. That's really something that is not sufficiently addressed and really an important topic for us as the community to think about. Fairness, bias, and equity. It's a topic that gained much more attention in the last several years, especially with different type of algorithmic biases. And the ways that basically certain groups of individuals or people don't get really treated fairly. First of all, at the time of the data collection, there are certain structural biases, and at the same time, basically some of these biases are even perpetuated when we actually use them in the algorithms. That's good news. What is not particularly, to me, exciting news is that we don't have chapters on ethics, data privacy. Basically, those were missed out, not due to our lack of intention to have these chapters. We have identified the authors for ethics, for privacy. We basically discuss with them, even discuss with other authors that were potentially interested in data governance and even legal issues in learning analytics. Sadly, we had attrition on these topics and we couldn't really secure the chapters, but I think this is not due to our disinterest in these topics, or we didn't pay much attention to that. I'd basically say that this edition also has a really nice emphasis on collaboration. And I think it's also a kind of a testament to the maturation of the field, so to say, on collaboration. And within the last several years, there was basically lots of emphasis on the emerging subfield within learning analytics, which is framed as collaboration learning analytics, and had a nice even special issue last year in JLA. And I think we can now see that in the first edition of the handbook, we had more like, computational methods for building knowledge communities. And also we had some other chapters that were more focused on the networks. In this one, we had very, very explicitly emphasis on collaboration. We have very explicit emphasis on the really nice overview of different network analytics methods that are used for collaboration. And my view is that collaboration really improved, but at the same time also as a field that is very interested in collaboration is really also recognizing that we probably want to emphasize much more on different methodologies in the future. Game-based analytics we didn't have last time. And to me, I think it's a really important topic. Last year, we edited a special issue on learning analytics and assessment, and which is basically published in Computers and Human Behavior. A number of papers use games. And I think my view is that game-based analytics is really important because it kind of offers an engaging way to involve our learners in the process, probably also early childhood. And K-12 is probably very relevant for that topic. At the same time, also gives us potential way to get more pieces of evidence that are assessing what kind of skills students are developing over time and get us much closer. So I think we need to pay much more attention to game-based analytics, especially inside of also physical environments where people need to play different roles and in environments such as simulation-based learning. I'm particularly excited that this chapter had more emphasis on K-12. K-12 analytics is, we know, really heavily underrepresented in the learning analytics literature, and we are still highly biased towards higher education. So it's really good that we have global perspectives to K-12 in this chapter, but at the same time, we really don't have sufficient representation still about different types of adoption approaches in schools. Adoption of learning analytics in schools is completely different. Even the vocabulary they are using is different. Many people basically get, in a way, scared when we start talking about some of the notions of learning analytics from higher education in schools. There's a different dynamics, there are different resources, there are different priorities. And I think this is topic very closely connected as well with something that we greatly have in this edition is the data literacy. And I'm really happy that we see that also from the leading authors that are coming from this kind of field that is data-driven decision-making in schools. And I think there's plenty that we can learn in learning analytics from data-driven decision-making in schools, especially even in higher education. We should be looking into that literature and seeing how they are building that data decision culture that we really don't spend sufficient time, and it basically often is preventing us to have the right type of impact and the right type of things. And the final, obviously, theme that we have here, we didn't have in the previous edition, is human-centered approaches. We basically had a cool special issue in JLA in 2019 on that provided a nice frame, and we here also had much more increase in this kind of human-centered approaches. I really hope we will have even much more in the future editions of the handbook, but more importantly inside of the field, because we really, really need to emphasize the ways how we are engaging stakeholders, how we are conducting our design processes, and also how we are making sure that we are creating types of technologies that are respectful of the people's needs and aligning and trying to basically enable people to do the things that are more suitable for their learning and teaching processes. So over back to you, Charles. I took probably longer than you anticipated.
No, that was good. That was great summary. I'd actually might throw it back to the editors and say there's something that I noticed, which is that we had to give people less the feedback. There is overlap here since last time. So last time I feel like we spent a lot of time talking to people about, oh, actually, you know, you're being too general. And this time people really seem to have not needed that feedback. They really just had a lane. They knew how it related to learning analytics, how it related to the community, and they could write to it. I was wondering if there's anything like that you noticed or think signals that the field is maturing in some way.
So that's a really tough question, Charles. I'm going to try to go first. And then to me, I probably think that there are a couple of things that are maybe signals. To me, I highlighted already basically this emphasis on collaboration. I think we see much more consolidation of how we are conceptualizing analytics of collaboration. And I think although we had only one chapter on self-regulated learning, I think also that chapter represents a really emerging emphasis. So in a way, we are probably getting a bit more maturity in the way how we are analyzing learning, how we are collecting data about learning, how we are engaging with the diversity of the methods and the perspectives that are available to us and that we are developing as well to collect richer data, to integrate these different data sources, as well as to link them with the theoretical notions and the types of relevant user interfaces. To me, that's probably one hint of the maturity. The other hint of the maturity to me is also probably a much more solid work that we presented here with respect to, for example, adoption and policies in learning analytics. Last time there were more fragmented pieces, I'd say, trying to really just look into the individual really approach, what they were thinking, what is necessary there, while here we had much more synthesized approaches, much broader perspectives, and also you can tell that much more work has been done in those areas. And not only that, but I think the whole handbook as well, the second edition that is more mature insofar as we actually see now much more summaries of what is happening inside the field, rather than basically individuals representing their own work and trying to basically reflect on what they personally did at one point in time. And it's really worth noting that most of these pieces of work that were in the first edition were submitted probably in 2014 and 15, and the handbook only published in 17, while this time we basically had all these pieces of work which basically were submitted 6 or 7 years later. So I'd say basically those are the two key highlights, but I want to let other editors as well to share their thoughts on this.
I was not involved in the first edition, but maybe in the second edition, we paid attention also to have 2 authors. So there was also collaboration inside each chapter could play a role, right, as we said, and from the feedback.
There's one other thing that I'm noticing, and I think this gives a nice inside view into when we were talking about how to organize the sections, we had some exercises where we talked about different ways we could organize the chapters. And one way that didn't make it off the cutting room floor was thinking about the applications as 2 kinds of applications. Applications as context we were thinking about, as applications as sort of theoretical lenses we were using. And I thought that was interesting because I'm looking back at the first edition and there's no way that would have worked. The chapters were they were sort of what we described. They were really interesting work that people were doing, but it was a little like, we're in the middle of this, let's represent what's going on. And when you have the chance to look back at more coherent bodies of work, there's a chance to be a little bit, I think, more coherent. And so if you look at the applications section, we have chapters on learning analytics for self-regulated learning, for collaboration, for writing, for discourse. These are, areas of education that we care about. And then we also have ones that are about places where analytics might be useful. So context of learning. So we have analytics for, teacher and student-facing analytics. We have professional learning analytics, informal learning and social media, institutional, game-based. And so the fact that we have sort of these whole areas where there's different work that gets tied together, I think that's pretty exciting. It's not something that really was happening in the first edition. So that's nice to see.
Yeah, I would absolutely 1,000% second what Dragan and Agathe and Alyssa are saying in terms of the previous edition. People were really writing about their work, and now they are writing about the work of the field, and there's a lot more like here are a bunch of citations to other people that have done this, and here's the data to back that up. It's also probably less kind of editorial in that sense. Like, here is the reason why we believe this thing. It's not aspirational like it was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Okay.
Oh, sorry, Charles, one last thing. When we were talking about what wasn't present, I think we talked about the fact that we didn't end up having a theory chapter this time around, but that actually maybe that's okay because we're doing such different things. There's lots of theories at play, and that we saw a lot more integration of theory into the different chapters. And so that's one of those things that it's missing from the table of context, but I don't think it's missing from the handbook, which I thought was important to point out.
Yeah, and I think that segues quite well into some of the challenges that we talked about, especially from the perspective of theory, in that we were trying to avoid being a kind of Bible of learning analytics. Like I said, this is considered a snapshot in time, but we wanted to not be the kind of presenting something like this is the theory of learning analytics. So that's another reason why maybe theory it's not appropriate to have a theory chapter, because then you kind of anoint a specific theory as representing the field, which I don't think is a great way to present it. Is that kind of what you were saying, Alyssa?
No, but it's also a good point.
Oh, okay.
No, you're transitioning to where we were going next, which I think is good. I was just saying that there's lots of different theories and which one to pick. So yes, I guess there's a concern about the one true theory, but I think it's also that maybe as we've matured, we've realized that there's a need to draw on different theories for different kinds of work. And so, yeah, that's all I was pointing out. But good transition to where we're going.
Transition to where we are. So here we wanted to possibly talk a little bit about the way that the book is kind of chunked, and part of the reasoning behind why it's chunked the way it is. So one, like I was just saying, we don't want to present something that is considered the truth, or that because this is an application in the handbook, that it is only an application. For example, Alyssa, you probably can explain this better than I can.
Do you want me to take the example?
Yeah, you can take the example, and the top line, like maybe the top line is everything can probably go in every chunk. Yeah.
Right. So I think there's sort of two things to think about. We've had a lot of discussions, and I mean, it's fine. I don't like the term application. To me, it's sort of like we're taking something and applying it. And I would argue that, for example, in collaborative analytics or self-regulated learning analytics, that we're actually doing some technique development as we are working in that area. We're not just taking a method and applying it. But I think that was sort of the point that we came up with, which is that, for example, you could imagine, we took away the example. I think the example I had in my mind was collaborative learning analytics. And so you could think about the fact that, okay, well, there's a bunch of techniques that we commonly use, such as network analysis or NLP, are both things that are very, there we go, very common in doing it. So go back to the prior slide, sorry. But what we can imagine is that we sort of look at how we analyze and for what purposes, and then the structures. And the notion is that you maybe need to have something from column A, B, and C in any learning analytics effort, but that when you're thinking about new people coming to the field, we have to sort of separate it out. It's that sort of notion of, giving people a map, which is an imperfect representation of reality, but the fact that it's sort of simplified helps them orient themselves. And so we thought that this was a reasonable way for people to think about sort of techniques, reasons, and places to use them, and then this bigger holistic view. And I think I just wanted to highlight, I think the panel that they had yesterday on scope of learning analytics pointed quite a few times to the importance of that third one as something that's really attended to strongly in learning analytics and not necessarily in some of our brother and sister fields.
Yes, I think it's also important to go back to kind of where we started, which is who is this for? And so these chunks are designed to be accessible to new people. So part of the question was that we need to answer was, okay, so what if someone is entering the field for the first time? What do they think it looks like? Which is hard, right? If you live and breathe it. But we talked to students and we tried to figure out what could make good entry points for the first time learning analytics person. So that's part of why we have these things. I mean, yes, there's problems with the word applications, there's problems with the word techniques, we can litigate this for a long time, but yeah.
We don't have a chapter on litigation. That's the point.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to the next slide, I think with the example, it might make a little more sense, which was, I was just thinking about the, this chapter that you could have collaboration as the theory of learning and network analysis is the technique, but then, well, you're still doing something with it. So for example, the setting might be for teachers or for students. And so that in some cases that hopefully you can see something from each of the sections in a chapter, even though it's in a particular section.
Yeah, exactly.
And just to point out, we have a nice shout out that at least for one doctoral student, it was useful.
Worked for one person, it was worth it. So now I think we can open the floor. I've kind of run out of screen real estate. So what I would ask is if people can put their questions in Hoover. You pronounced it differently to the way that I have always thought it was pronounced. Hoover?
I thought it was Hova.
Hova? Okay.
You say Hoover, I say Hova, there's the link.
But if you can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, we'll take the question verbally.
Yeah. And maybe, Charles, we can stop sharing.
Okay.
That's a good idea, yeah. And also, I know we have a lot of authors of the handbook here, so if people have things to share about the handbook and or its process from that perspective, the other side of the editorial desk, that might be interesting as well.
If you want to ask questions, just also raise your hand here and you're welcome. Or just even to hear the sound of your voice in this room.
Say hello, please.
Ask some question.
Please.
Yes, it's me.
Hi, Rogers.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. First, thanks for the editors and all the authors of the handbook. I think this is a very good, important resource. I think, Lang mentioned that it should not be a Bible, but I can say I used the handbook. Actually, I'd never printed out a very big piece of writing, like a handbook, but I had it always in my bag and I always moved around with it. I think it was very helpful. And also when I was doing my teaching as a PhD, I realized when I was asked to do some teaching on learning analytics, that was always the best kind of reference I could give to anyone who wants to explore the area. So I think it's a very good resource, and I'm really happy to see another edition coming out. I'm just wondering, I think you touched on this about like the difference between the authorship. So in the first you had 10 and then 11 countries, and I think as you mentioned, I think it could be the same geographical area. And this may not be just for handbook, but it could also be for all our like publications at at LAC, and I think these are things that have been discussed even at executive level. I'm wondering, like, what could be the best approach to diversify a little bit about the authorship? I don't know, is it about, maybe could it be some targeted kind of maybe invitation to different groups? And I think we have now different special interest groups across different regions representing learning analytics, and possibly having a few authors presenting certain cases on different regions. I mean, just to bring out perspectives from different regions, and that could also make it more comprehensive and bring in more diversity, not just in the handbook, also possibly now in the different publications. It's just about the diversity and how we can actually expand our reach to other regions.
I think that's a really great point, and the special interest groups is a super good idea. I think that's what we need. We need some more creative ways of getting invitations out. That is how we tried to operationalize this time, but yeah, it needs improvement. It needs some more creative ideas. That's a really good point.
Can I just put an asterisk by that? I think it's a good point and a good idea, but I also think there is a danger of only inviting authors from certain regions in that sort of here's what it's like over here perspective. And I think there's actually lots of very good work happening that is also core to the discipline. So I respect that idea. I think there's value in it, but I also think that there's a way to implement it that could inadvertently sort of be marginalizing as well. And so, you're only qualified to speak on this thing because it's your country, and that's not what we want to do. So I think we need to balance that with a strategy to also, I think we're always more aware of the people around us. And so some of this is a self-education thing of starting to become more aware of work of people from other regions that we can reach out to. And that comes from setting up more diversity in our committees. I hope this isn't to call out too much, but I know I see Isabel here, and I know that being on the committee with Isabel and Roberto, who have very different networks than I do, when we were talking about people to invite for chairs or positions, the list of ideas that first came to mind for the three of us was very different, and that's really valuable. And so thinking about how we can put people in those positions so that the invitations go out in the right ways is, I think, something else we could talk about also.
Yeah, I also like to think about these type of things as a developmental process as well. So rather than basically just kind of singling out an individual to speak about a particular region, I basically like us to see far more conscious effort that we are basically engaging with the researchers from particular regions, that we are basically engaging into collaboration with them. And then based on that, we kind of help basically they first grow their own community of researchers. And at the same time, we also learn from them as well about their own different perspectives to learning analytics and everything else. To me, it was really enriching when we had a project which was funded by the European Union to basically build these links between Europe and Latin America. And Isabel was part of that project. And I don't know how many other programs there are by different types of funders, but to me, that's the type of thing that you want to kind of have, is that basically you are kind of not only thinking whether I can extract an individual for a particular region, but rather can I actually help them to seed the development of the field in their community and help them basically grow that field, but at the same time also help us to learn much more, because I don't like to see that as basically colonization in a way that we kind of are coming and kind of, as missionaries of learning analytics, but instead we basically come in that process as partners. I think there's one question on HUA by Young Farmer. One of the exciting parts of learning analytics is the transdisciplinary nature. Was the development of this handbook constrained by the medium? For example, written text that we used, or maybe consider a learning analytics dashboard interface for the next version? Well, that would be a very analytics way to do our learning analytics handbook, wouldn't be? So maybe, I think certainly there are issues, the way how people were actually doing and approaching these type of things for us as well, to kind of get a different insight, especially in terms of transdisciplinary. My question is though, whether it is just the mission of the handbook to basically provide the analytics for everything, or we are already seeing lots of, so to say, analytics that is emerging about the analytics itself. And I think we are seeing, even in the program of the proceedings of LAC 2022 and also previous LACs, many more systematic lit reviews. We are seeing far more kind of different perspectives, what people are doing and how they are doing certain types of things. So in a way, we are seeing also much more kind of visualizations of the field, of the networks as well that are doing. We are even seeing like much more like tweetology tweet as well, which was a paper which was basically at the start of the conference presented as well. So to me, basically, I still emphasize that this handbook, at least at the time, and the format is a snapshot. To me, the question is, and I think Alyssa also made a point before, is whether we want to see the handbook as a snapshot or a continuous process. So in a way that the handbook becomes almost like a continuously evolving resource, where we basically are always adding a new hot topic that is important. The question is, of course, how to do it in the best way so that the authors get the credit, as well as we also have enough for our time and bandwidth to kind of engage into that continuous process of doing the handbook.
This gives me an idea. We have the handbook and there is no way to interact with the handbook as we have now. Would it be possible maybe with Google Sheets or so that we have a place where people could give comments to the chapter they read and have a kind of conversations on these chapters? I think loud now, I didn't think of it before, but could be a way to have a more vivid handbook, a lively handbook.
So let's add to all the exciting ideas that we will not have time for at least today, but I remember a vision. I think this was I actually remember distinctly, we were at a table outside, it was warm, so it was Arizona, and we talked about each chapter kind of having like an interactive tutorial at the end and a data set. I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but we had some ideas for these things, and I think we really have to think carefully about where we want to put our efforts, because that was a real vision that, I think we struggled to get to just the chapters. But as Agathe's talking, one idea that we might think about is sort of an open project. Like there's some tools like Marginalia and Hypothesis that are available. Yeah, Bodan, exactly. I was totally thinking about social annotation, and that we could set something up with people able to go in and annotate the chapters. And that way it's a conversation with the chapter, but it's also a conversation with each other around it. And maybe Lassie is a way to kick something like that off. And that, I think thinking of it as a layer that goes on top of or around the handbook might be, frankly, just a more realistic, tractable way to get progress on this, because I think some of our bigger ambitions we found just overwhelming to make happen. And again, it takes a lot of time and energy for people to build these things, and they don't always, it's not all about credit, but we're all strapped too thin. And so I think acknowledging the time and labor we ask people to put into things is important too.
You could go to a Solopedia version as well. That's another option, which is kind of, Wikipedia style, so that's crowdsourced from everyone. But that's not academic sort of style, because, who's peer reviewing it, I guess. So I think you're kind of constrained with what you've got, but at least if you put annotations, you can then track those, right? They're trace elements, so that gives you some better way to track the engagement, maybe. Potentially another option is to have a learning analytics handbook that's a chatbot. And that essentially is the intelligent, it's got all the knowledge of what you've written, but it's actually an interactive chatbot.
Only if it has my accent.
Sure.
That means you have to voice the entire chapter of the whole handbook, Charles. You sure?
I have to read a dictionary. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those are really interesting ideas. I mean, maybe the handbook, we could just basically, set up a wiki site that basically starts with it as a seed with these current chapters, and then people potentially can take over it. So that could be a way, but my view is that always requires a community effort. It's not really something that you can actually expect in a kind of a way how we are doing the handbook itself. And the good news is that the handbook itself is basically like published as open access. So I think there is a potential to consider something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember the conversations Alyssa refers to, and I think, even since those conversations, the technology has moved on to make it less effort. So, in the future, maybe things will be more, I think we did cost out some things, and it was just price prohibitive to be able to do interactive stuff with the website and stuff.
Yeah.
So, but maybe that's not true anymore.
Exactly. The thing that I noticed, I'm just changing the topic though, is that we basically ask everybody to submit their questions to Hua, but then we also have some of the authors who are not participating in the conference and who are just here for this session. So just basically flag that. And I noticed that Caroline also had a question. So I posted on Hua, but basically just we want to pay attention to the authors as well who are not members of the conference or who are not participating in the conference or are just here, that they are also included into the conversation. So I'm going to just read Caroline's question, and then I'm not saying I'm volunteering to answer it, but I'm going to read it. When do you think of the handbook? What audience do you think of? Field, undergrad, grad practitioners? That's a great question. My view is that probably the handbook in the present way is more suited for the grad students and also those who are basically professionals who are entering into the field. They are basically like probably practitioners. I think the handbook itself is not really that difficult to read, even for the undergrads. It's just that makes me wonder the extent to which we are seeing the number of undergrad courses that are currently available in learning analytics, that people are going to use it. And I'd rather probably anticipate it'll be far more used by the grad students and the practitioners. But I'm sure the other editors may have their own thoughts.
I remember a conversation where an editor who will remain nameless thought at the time that undergrads would be a big population because learning analytics was just growing, and it was going to get out of master's programs and into undergrad programs. I think I'm with Dragan. I don't think that has happened in the intervening time, but it would be great if it was part of undergraduate curriculum. Does anyone think differently?
I don't think differently on that point, but I do think there is something else in that we've sort of danced around, but that's worth highlighting. And I think we made a big effort by asking people to make their chapters short, and at least with some of the feedback that we gave authors, to make these chapters very accessible. I mean, obviously it's open access, so it's accessible on that level, but there's certainly, I think, we talked a little bit about how sometimes as a PhD student, you can feel like it's trial by fire trying to figure out how to walk into this jungle of jargon. And I'm sure there's, it's always challenging, but I think we tried with these, short open chapters to try to make the field open. And so maybe it's not to undergraduates, but I think our LAC conference, we're still seeing 50% new participants. There's a huge amount of growth. And I don't know that it's coming from the undergrad level, but recognizing that new to the field isn't just PhD students, I think is a really important part of our audience. So people who may be mature in what they're doing, but are coming into our space. And so there is a sense of they are novices on that dimension. So to me, that's a really important audience as well. And that we're welcoming them.
I agree with Alyssa. I just met a German colleague. He's a professor since 4 years, but now he's beginning with learning analytics, and it's a great way for him to begin with the handbook.
Yeah.
And I also totally, and I also think there's a lot of people working within universities who are getting a lot of contact with software companies and products. And they are using jargon, and they are looking for resources to try to better understand what analytics means. And as far as we can help kind of them make intelligent decisions about products, so I think it is useful.
Yeah.
I'm going to can I throw something out there as a sort of a new point to think about? I guess this is coming from two places in my head. One, the comment that our keynote speaker made yesterday several times, which is that we need to get I think she said we need to get a marketing firm on the job to make people aware of what's going on in learning analytics. So we might think about, we've got this really great resource. how do we start to think about outreach? And, you know, as academics, I don't think as a whole we're very good about making our things accessible and putting them out there for people to read. And I think we might think about a bit more about how to do that. Certainly the Chinese translation makes it accessible to an audience, but still, how are we sharing it? And I was going to say, I don't know how it's happened, but the events we do at NYU with NYU Learn that we moved online because of the pandemic, somehow we've started to attract a whole bunch of people from all around the world who, you know, it's often the first time they're coming in contact with this. I don't really know how they're finding it, but there's a lot of interest, and that's how we ended up making this sort of LA 101 site. And the number of people who aren't connected to our community who are coming there is high. So I feel like there is this real need, and thinking about how we get that handbook out there so people find it. And I don't have an answer to how, but I think we should put some time and energy into that, since we put so much time and energy into getting the book out in the first place.
Yeah, that's great. So we're taking any suggestions for maybe if everybody everyone on this call tweets out that the handbook is available, that would be very helpful.
It would help if you had to share this book link on the actual page where the book is. That would be one start.
Share sorry?
Yeah, like when you go to the handbook page, there's a button that says share it and it creates a tweet or something like that, right? I think that's what he's saying. That's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay, so unless anyone wants the final word, I might wrap up with some thank yous. And the first people to thank are all the authors. Thank you so much for submitting and working with us. That was really great. We know it was a slog, but we really appreciate it, and we are going to do our best to get your work out into as many people's hands as possible. So thank you. Also, we'd like to thank the Solar Executive, and as specifically, we'd like to thank Grace and Nicole for really helping us out. I don't think they're here, but thank you, Grace and Nicole. They did a lot of legwork. And a special shout out to Yancy, who is on this call. Thank you so much for working with us to get the book up online so quickly. Thank you. But yes, everyone who was involved, my fellow editors, all the authors, just thank you. I'm very happy that it is now done and out. So yeah, with that, do any other editors want to say anything? Any final words?
I just basically want to highlight the lion's share of work that Charles put into this handbook. I mean, he is the person who is really done lots of heavy lifting and everything, and requires a significant amount of the credit than at least I do. I mean, far more credit for this whole handbook and the entire enterprise, and the way how he managed to organize everything, to coordinate everything, to basically communicate with different authors throughout the entire review process and everything. So Charles, thanks so much. I don't think this handbook would ever be possible without you.
Thanks, Charles, really.
Same here.
Thanks, everyone.
Woohoo, you're free.
I'm free.
And now on to AGM.
Yeah.
See you all at the AGM.
Thank you all. Bye.